How often this has happened that we have a very important message, very critical message for our team, for our company, for our stakeholders. Things are not working out as they should. We want them to be better. We're putting a great deal of effort, and people are just not responding to it. They don't see the worry, and that is because our nonverbals are not congruent with our message. We have a stern, negative message, and show a relaxed, pleasant, nonverbal message. And that incongruency will confuse the audience massively and will kill the message.
Hi, welcome to the Revolving Change podcast, where we help you make lasting, measurable change in your career and business. Today, you're with Joanna. I am one of the junior coaches here at Revolving Change, and also here with me today is our founder and resident dinosaur, Mr. Jorge Lobo. Say hi, Jorge.
Hi, Jorge.
All right, so today we're actually going to be continuing on the expansion of the communication skill. And today we are primarily focusing on the verbal and the nonverbal communication and how they should actually match. Because oftentimes I'm a victim of this. Someone says one thing, but their actions, their behavior signals another thing. So that's very, very confusing. And being left in a confusing state is not pleasant at all. Oh, so I mean, imagine that in business, right, Jorge? Like,
Very, very costly, actually, and is very underrated the importance of the congruency between nonverbal and verbal communication. One on one to many to one, and also to some extent, many to many. But we're going to go through them. The most critical part is that in verbal, you have the tone by which you're communicating, the speed, which means the speed of consumption for the audience to understand your message, the cadence, the clarity, how you're delivering. Are you using aids? Are you using presentations? Are you using props? That's all verbal. But if the nonverbal doesn't match all those elements of verbal, then there will be a incongruency which will be confusing. It will often actually kill the message completely, because if you have a positive message with negative nonverbals or vice versa, and you hit your microphone like I just did, then communication gets disrupted. To which extent? Well, if you're intending to use a simple example of business at a mid and top level, when you're intending to convey to your team a message of urgency that something needs to change, we need to radically take action, urgently take radical action on a particular problem, but we do this in a smile and with a coffee and with a joke, and behaving in a way that it's everything is hanky-dory and everything is fine, then people will not give it the attention and the urgency and seriousness it needs, and it deserves. On the other hand, to use the example of the opposite, you have great news and we have achieved our goals and we are happy about that, and we want to reward people, if it's emotionally to begin with our gratitude for a great job done, but we do so in a stern, not motivating tone, and showing a nonverbal that is negative, then the audience will wonder, how good was this really? Is this really what we were supposed to do? Why is it that a positive message has this negative aura and appearance?
mm,
It may sound
right.
easier than it is, but it's not always easy because we don't often see ourselves. And unless we have the feedback, now we're touching on feedback again, somebody will focus on that saying, wait a minute, it sounds like it was good news, but you seem to be upset or worried about it.
Yeah. So would it be right for me to say that you can never separate the verbal from the nonverbal?
Well, sometimes you have no choice. That is separate because you are speaking through a microphone and people don't see your verbal. So the tone. So we're talking about two-way communication, right? We have we interacting one to one or one to many, many to one. Yes, you cannot separate them. You're totally right. You cannot separate them because people will automatically see your demeanor, see your position, will see the nonverbals. I mean, there is some very interesting speakers. Some of them I really enjoy listening to. Some of them are former FBI agents that will describe how they read nonverbals. And it's not what people think that, oh, because the position of your eyes, you're automatically lying because you're retrieving information from either memory or you're inventing it. That is not it. That is part of NLP. That is not it. There's different traits of behavior, nonverbal behavior that combined with the verbal will start pointing at inconsistencies for an interrogator to understand better if the person is maybe being a bit spar- sparing with the truth, not telling the complete truth or manipulating facts. So, yes, they both go hand in hand 100%. And we hardly ever
Right.
train on that. I mean, we have our program, of course, and we've worked with our clients on that, but is so underrated in terms of the impact.
Yeah.
And actually, we talked about the confusion. Let's talk about the other side of it for a moment, and that is that when it works well, it dramatically amplifies the impact of good communication. So if you have an important message, when you have congruency of nonverbal and verbal, the power of the message increases exponentially. Whether it's positive or negative is irrelevant. The power of the message will be much better understood when you have full congruency. That is clearly to be seen when people communicate.
The reason I asked that question is because I've experienced this in the past that one of the managers before a meeting, before a team meeting, went and laid out a disclaimer. It's like, oh, I'm really having a bad day. Like, there's something happening in the family. So please forgive my
Demeanor.
tone, appearance, and things. Yeah,
Mm,
my demeanor and things like
mm.
that. And proceeded to facilitate the meeting. So I asked that because even though logically I knew for a fact that his demeanor, how he was acting, was not in line with, it really had nothing to do with the business. I could just logically take the facts of what he was presenting as that, and not have his demeanor affect how I feel towards the report. But at the end of the meeting, or as I was sitting there, I couldn't help but be affected by his demeanor. So that's why I was asking, is there a way to separate them? Because logically, I know that I just needed to take in the facts of whatever he was reporting, but somehow his demeanor has influenced me subconsciously of how I'm receiving that message.
Actually, was consciously, right? Because you're very aware of it. So,
Hmm.
and you're the proof that you cannot separate them. Just the example you just shared with us is the proof you cannot separate them. The key is how well do you know the other person, how much you trust what the other person said to process that and actually archive it, put it away, saying, no, I
Mm,
feel what I do because
yeah.
feelings are non negotiable. If you feel upset, angry, disappointed, cold,
Hmm.
warm, feelings are non negotiable. You feel what you feel. The question
Hmm.
is, what are we going to do with those feelings? Where are we going to archive them or not archive them? Are we going to keep them and use them or not? So
Mm,
you were given information to not value those feelings as important, don't attach importance to those feelings. And you were in doubt
yeah.
because they were extremely strong, and maybe because you know the person very well, or maybe because you knew there was some things you didn't do as good as you should have or could have and wanted to, and then maybe there was some
Hmm.
justified suspicion that maybe there is some negative feedback coming your way. All that plays into the way we feel about things. So, one easy way to deal with that is the next interaction with that person, you ask a question that will clarify that. You can find an intelligent personal question to how's your situation? Is that improved? Are you okay? Did you see the work I submitted? Was that okay? How did you find it? Do you have any feedback for me? Or I would appreciate you give me feedback on that. How did you perceive it? How did you like it? So, and that way you can deal with the uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the worst things that exist. Uncertainty, especially when it comes down to relationships, not knowing where we are at, not knowing how we are being appreciated and judged, because some people unfortunately will judge us. And that's why we seek feedback, and that's why we insist on training feedback so much as we do, and training expectations as much as we do. But yes, no, you cannot separate them. But learning how
Okay.
to deal with them is extremely important. Extremely important.
Hmm.
And I think the person that said that is a person that is very well aware of verbal and nonverbal, because this person knew that maybe even if the verbal might have been okay, he could not control his nonverbals. He could not control the fact that maybe his shoulders are down, as he's speaking slower than usual, and maybe taking deep breaths in between, and negative or tiresome behaviors that don't correspond and don't match the exciting positive mood of the meeting. So that shows that the person is aware of good communication skills. Kudos for
Now
that.
that we Yeah, now that we've ventured into the topic of you as a communicator, you have to be aware and alert that your nonverbal and verbal have to match, right? What about if you're receiving the information? Or being
That is
aware
not
of verbal
matching.
and non, yeah. You're receiving the information that's not matching. However, I'm speaking for myself because sometimes I am hypersensitive to mannerisms and behaviors. I tend to notice things that people won't usually notice. And sometimes it doesn't mean anything, but sometimes it can mean something. So, how does one manage a mismatch between verbal and nonverbal? Because you also said it yourself. It depends on
Yeah.
how well you know this person, right?
Also, that plays a role. But how many days do we have now time to go through this one?
We
That
have
is a
like
very
10 more
yeah, that
minutes.
well, that's a very important question. It's a very rich question, and I think that is the key, because when you're sending and you're communicating, unless you get feedback, you don't know that there's an incongruency. It's only when you're on the other side, like you were now asking, that you know there isn't, or you perceive at least an incongruency. Sometimes it's perception, right? You perceive something that you ask me and say, "Well, you seem upset with." No, I'm not. No, not at all. I'm happy. It's great, but I want to go. I need to pick up the kids from school. I'm a bit pressed for time. So that's all what it was. All right. So, but there are so many other things that play a role into this, and we're not going to be able to go through all of them in this short. It's in our program actually. Gender plays a role. Seniority and generations play a role. Culture play a role. In some cultures, asking questions is impolite. You don't ask questions. In other cultures, if you don't ask questions, you get your butt kicked. Why didn't you ask me the question? Because you're expected and supposed to be asking questions. Things that I'm sure you have heard, that when some people qualify the question or the communication depending who the sender is, because it's a woman, then they automatically, if it's a male population or other females also, because sometimes females to females are worse than men to female. I've
Yeah.
seen it all. Not always, but it can happen. But there's a demeanor that is expected, and there is a certain congruency that is, of course, must be there. And when it's not there, it's very shocking. How come a woman can be aggressive? Well, women can be very aggressive, as much or even worse than men can be. So all those aspects play a role. Gender does, the generations do. When I talk with younger people, I need to be mindful of the vocabulary I use. When I say, let's rewind this, and people go like, rewind? What do you mean by rewind? I mean, they've never seen a cassette. They don't know what rewinding means, okay? So it's just a dumb example, but is using examples that younger generations will relate to. The same applies. I mentioned gender, I mentioned generation, culture. Culture is fundamental. And, the culture the area of the planet where you come from, which I'm familiar with, which is Southeast Asia, and you compare that with Central Europe or Africa or North America, radically different, radically different. And gender in that culture compared with culture and gender in other cultures adds complexity. You have the complexity of gender, complexity of culture, and the last one is language. Because if I'm speaking not slow enough and I'm not articulating well, which I'm accused of regularly with reason, and I use maybe a vocabulary that is not adapted to my audience, so I'm not delivering at the speed of consumption, I'm not using vocabulary they understand, I'm not taking care of cultural differences and gender, that communication is a perfect recipe to be a disaster, complete disaster. And the problem is going to be that because of those obstacles, we will not know that it was a disaster until the ash hits the fan. And then we will
Mm-hmm.
discover that communication didn't work because people will not ask, because nobody will check for understanding, because, of course, they understand if they don't ask any questions. That's what we think. But they're not asking any questions because they feel inhibited, because they don't want to admit they don't understand the language. They don't want to admit they don't understand the vocabulary because they will feel that they're stupid, or they will feel they're going to be judged, or because it's a woman among so many men, I'm the woman asking questions, so I'd rather not ask anything. All those elements play a critical role. And this brings me to one conclusion, and that is what we have done with so many clients is it's got to do with culture. The culture of the company is fundamental to have the foundations of feedback, of expectations management, of communication skills, of dealing with culture, dealing with generational issues, dealing with languages, dealing with all the aspects that will affect the way people work with each other, which is our business. That's what Revolving Change does. So that was a short question to a very long answer, because we could go now into each one of those elements. And like I do
Yeah.
say, find a hair and create a wig out of it, and spend a whole day analyzing and dissecting all the different
Mm-hmm.
issues that are with each one of them. And then the
Mm-hmm.
combination of all of them.
Yeah. So now that we've explored that part, it's really important to understand that as a receiver as well, you need to be conscious of the different factors that could affect nonverbal. Actually, for me, one of the things that would hit home so much is culture, because we're an international company and we work with different people of different cultural backgrounds, and culture plays a huge role in nonverbals, and intentionally making yourself aware of these things is highly, highly important. Now, we talked about the importance of why these are, but I'm still not getting a clear picture of the impact of miscommunication breakdown in the sense of verbal, nonverbal, because you did mention earlier it's costly, you know?
Can be very.
And yeah, so can you please help me explore like the impact of a mismatch with verbal and nonverbal in terms of one-to-one setting, one is to many, many is to many, and even down to corporate and even an individual level of the impact this has.
Measurable change, very important. But measuring, this is an area where measuring change and measuring the impact is very, very difficult. It's an area where I personally don't feel comfortable measuring it, because we have two components, and you have two components with each one has several components. So verbal has tone, speed, vocabulary. Nonverbal has eye contact, position, connection with the audience. All those elements, each one of them plays a role. So knowing which one is having an impact, positive or negative, is very, very difficult. So I will not insist that, as much as we normally do measure change and measure the impact on change here, I feel not comfortable measuring it.
Right.
However,
So we're trying.
yeah, go ahead. You try what?
So what you're trying to say is like it really varies depending on the individual situation of that person.
Then you're talking two people, right? To begin with, one-on-one is two people
Yeah, one on
already, and
one.
each one
Yeah.
has verbal, nonverbal, verbal, nonverbal. So
Mm,
mathematically, you have so many variables, it's going to be very difficult to
mm,
pin them down. But let's look at
mm,
one-on-one exchange, because the key is, as we have learned over decades, how well have, in this case, one-on-one, the two interlocutors being trained on feedback, communication, listening skills, feedback skills, and some more. I'm mentioning some of the most, I would say, critical ones for the situation. If they are trained on feedback, it's going to be very easy for one to give feedback to the other, or for one to request feedback from the other. So if we assume, which is not a good word to use, you know what happens when we assume. But if we assume that they are our clients and we have trained their teams in, for instance, feedback, listening skills, and expectations management, maybe perception management also, then they will be prepared to gauge their communication and act immediately as there is a deviation. So the moment I feel that, wait a minute, you tell me everything is okay, but you're looking down, you're not having eye contact with me, your tone of voice is negative, I will stop you right there and say, listen, can I ask you a question without offending? Yeah, sure. Well, and then you ask a question. I'm getting these vibes as if, this is negative, and I thought, we're having a positive conversation. Am I sensing it wrong? Because that's the feeling I'm getting. And then the person will tell you, well, yeah, the truth is that I didn't want to say because I don't know how to say it. I'm upset about something, or I'm unhappy. Or it will say, yeah, something happened at home and my wife is sick. Or, I don't like that example, but I broke my favorite vase in the living room and I'm upset about that. It has nothing to do with you and I or our interaction. So acting upon it immediately is extremely important, but you need to have the skills. You need to have been trained. You need to practice the skills. If they're both untrained, it's going to happen what happens most of the time. Nobody says anything. So the person that sends the message thinks the message was well sent and well received. The person receiving it received a message, not knowing whether it's the right message, the right way, the right intention, and they both part ways with their own beliefs. And if this was critical, I go back to what I said earlier, when the ish hits the fan, then is when they discover this was really bad and we did not communicate properly. So it comes down to having been trained. Now, this one-to-one at corporate level is the same thing, because here one-on-one on a private life, people will not have been trained, and then there is a different set of scenarios and problems, but that's not our business. We're not into family counseling, so we're not going to go there. But when you have a one-to-many, for instance, and now I can give you a few ideas of how we have helped managers solve the situation. One key thing is preparation. Preparation will affect your self-confidence. And I think this rings a bell with you personally, because self-confidence is an area that you've been working on when you're delivering, when you're confronting, when you're giving feedback, when you're requesting feedback. So preparation is critical. You prepare your communication. Maybe you practice it. You practice, one of my favorite tools, right? You practice in the mirror. You listen to
Mirror, yeah.
yourself. You watch yourself. You record yourself with your phone while you're in the mirror. So you record yourself from the side and talk to the mirror. And because what that will do for you is you will see on the phone how other people will see you, not how you see yourself. Okay. So
Mm,
that's a small detail, but it's not unimportant. When you're preparing it, you
yes.
record from the side. That's the way the audience will perceive you. You're going to see
Mm,
if your position is not what it should be. You're going to see things you may want to change, or you will be happy
mm-hmm,
with your recording. So that's one thing.
mm-hmm,
The other thing is you prepare one or two people in the audience with clues and cues they will give you. If, let's say in my case, which I've done, I speak sometimes too fast, I get excited, and I have a cue with one person in the audience who will make a particular sign to highlight, and I will keep an eye on these two people. I'm speaking too fast. Okay. Sometimes, to make it even easier and more fun, I will tell the audience, by the way, there is Mr. So and so and Mrs. So and so. Mr. So and so will do this whenever I speak too fast, and so will clap once when I'm mumbling. And everybody laughs. It relaxes the atmosphere. It sets the tone. And it could be serious, right? You can set the tone. Well, this is a difficult meeting, it's a complicated meeting, and I want to make sure everybody understands and that I'm articulate. So and so will tell me to slow down, and so will tell me to stop mumbling, and that's part of ensuring good communication. People will appreciate it. It takes
Yeah.
humbleness, it takes openness, it takes maturity in
Hmm.
your leadership and managerial skills. But these are small hacks that will make a well of a difference in ensuring that verbal nonverbal communication are as congruent as possible. So we talked about one-on-one, one to many, many to one. Well, it's not so applicable because you're just being bombarded, right? So in this
Yeah.
context, but you can still agree to the rules when you're going to have. I mean, we've had that in business coaching at the time, feedback sessions many to one. So the board, the senior people, myself, Mark, we would have feedback sessions with our team, and the team would ask questions, and we agree the rules. The rules are we only can ask clarifying questions to the questions or statements we were told when we get feedback. We're going to be told, given feedback. We can ask only clarifying questions, so no defensive stuff, no justification, clarification only. And one question per person. So we go the whole thing. Okay, I had only at the time, what was it, 70 people, something like that, but not all of them were there. So you have everybody can ask one question. Sometimes you get to two questions, right? So even if it's many to one, set the rules first, set the expectations first, agree on the process, and agree on how it's going to work, and that makes sure that it is a positive outcome. But then you, as a recipient, will see the nonverbals of people, and you can ask clarifying questions. Like, for instance, if you're given feedback which is maybe very negative, you can say, well, how negative is this? Because you're smiling a lot, you're being very candid about it. So how bad is this? You can ask a question, clarifying question, some feedback. Or the other way around. Somebody's giving you some really negative stuff with a big smile on their face. So, well, so both cases. So you can interact and ask for clarification. Extremely important. And this is a many to one. It works. Now, many to many, that's a disaster. So we're not going to go there. Many to
Yeah.
many. It's
Many to many is
you need a
it's a little
moderator.
bit
There's going to
tricky.
be the one. There's going to
Yeah.
be. You have many to many. You have for instance, a Zoom call, and people are talking to each other and they're interacting. You need a moderator, of course. Otherwise, that will
Hmm.
totally get out of control. It will just
Yeah.
derail. But
Right.
again, if it's
So
prepared, if you have expectations and you have agreed rules, it works.
yeah. So like what we've been talking about so far, what I understand, preparation is really as key when it comes to
Yes.
communication. That's been a common theme of what we've been talking about every time we discuss communication. If you're the giver of the information, preparation is really key on your end. From today, though, one of the practical things that I was able to understand and adapt immediately is number one, if you're delivering the if you're delivering the information, you can prepare by observing how you act in front of people, either by looking in the mirror or recording yourself and then reviewing afterwards.
You can also do a wet
And
run.
then,
Allow me to come in with another one. You can do a
yeah.
wet run. Take a number, select a
Oh,
small number of people, and do a wet run
hmm,
to the presentation and
yeah.
hear
Yeah.
live how they respond to you while you record
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. And then that as well. And then for someone who's receiving, on the receiving end of the communication, when it comes to verbal nonverbal, you number one have to understand different aspects about this person, um, culture, gender, getting to know them personally if you have time, if you really work together, not personally, I mean, getting to know them a little bit more as you continually work with them, as well as, which is very, very important, giving feedback or asking, clarifying questions, which is also part of developing, needing to have feedback skills.
I need to come in with one thing in the preparation part, which is true, but it's
Mm-hmm.
almost for anything we do in preparation is often the key to success.
Right.
Understanding the culture of who you will communicate to. I'm talking about the sender now. is very important. If I have in front of me Americans, Germans, Icelandic, Danish, and Filipinos, and I'm
Hmm.
going to talk about a particular topic, I need to make sure that their understanding of my language, the one I'm going to use, because I don't speak Visaya, I speak English, I speak German, I speak Danish, but I don't speak Visaya. So, what language am I going to choose? English, of course. So,
Hmm.
how proficient is my audience in understanding my message? Am I going to use vocabulary that will be understandable to everyone? I'm going to be using the speed, delivery at the speed of consumption for everybody. Not too slow because I'm going to put some of them to sleep, not too fast, I'm going to lose the other one. So that's a verbal part. Then the nonverbal has to go along with it. So I need to have eye contact with my audience and I need to figure out as I see nonverbal reactions, are they coming along? Are they on board or not? If I see the look at me, what I call the automobile look, eyes that say nothing and they're like frozen, maybe I'm having a problem of communication because their nonverbals are showing I'm not getting through, or they're petrified, they're terrified. I don't know. It depends on the message. When you have other people that start looking at their phone while you're talking to them, that speaks volumes for itself. So all of that plays a role on how you prepare and how ready you are to phase the different elements in the communication and your audience. Extremely important. Extremely important.
Yeah, yeah. Preparation does play a key role in all of
Definitely.
these. Yeah. So that was very, very rich communication. Exploring verbal nonverbals today. I believe there are more things. We can go into deeper things about verbal nonverbals. If you're listening today and you have questions about verbal nonverbal or you're interested in joining a live workshop, we actually have one upcoming soon. So please do
Yep.
visit our website for the schedules of our free workshops. Going back, just comment, message us. We're very, very eager to hear from each and every one of you because, again, this is what we're doing here is for you. Yeah, so that is it for today. I think we're going to venture into a different skill next week. So please watch out for that. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to comment, ring us up. Until the next podcast, this has been Joanna. And here with me today is Jorge. And we are going to say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Ciao.
Ciao.